Here is what nobody tells you about the INFJ door slam. By the time it happens, it has already been happening for a long time. The slam is not the event. It is the sound of something that finished a while ago. I want to start with a contradiction, because I think the contradiction is the actual subject of this video. INFJs are widely known, even celebrated, for their loyalty, for showing up, for the kind of patient, sustained, unglamorous presence that most relationships never get from anyone. And the same INFJs who are capable of that loyalty are also capable of ending relationships completely, suddenly, with no warning and no negotiation, and never looking back. Both things are true about the same people, often about the same relationships. The loyalty and the door slam are not opposites. They come from the same place. And understanding how that is possible is, I think, one of the more genuinely useful things this channel can offer. Here is the part that surprises people, including a lot of INFJs themselves, before they examine it closely. The door slam does not feel sudden from the inside. From the inside, it is the most carefully considered decision the INFJ has made about that relationship. What looks sudden from the outside is the visible end of a process that has been running privately for a long time, sometimes years, completely invisible to the person it concerns. If this channel keeps explaining the things about you that other people have never understood, subscribe. This is what we do here. Every single video. Let's get into it. 1. The slam is the last 5% of a process that started long ago. I want to start with the most important reframe in this entire video, because if this lands, everything else makes more sense. When people describe the INFJ door slam, they describe it as an event. One day everything was fine, and the next day the person was gone, unreachable, uninterested, completely withdrawn, with no real explanation offered. The framing treats the slam as the thing that happened, as the decision, as the moment where something changed. It is not the moment where something changed. It is the moment where something that had already changed became visible. A woman I corresponded with, an INFJ in her early 40s who had been on both ends of this pattern, having ended friendships this way, and also having had it done to her by another INFJ, described the process with a phrase that stuck with me. She called it the long unraveling that nobody is invited to watch. The actual ending of the relationship, from her perspective, happened gradually, privately, over what she estimated was close to 2 years. A slow accumulation of moments, small disappointments, small revelations of character, small instances where the gap between who someone said they were and who they consistently were became a little more visible. None of these moments individually mattered enough to act on, but each one got filed. By the time she actually withdrew, stopped responding, stopped initiating, eventually became unreachable, the relationship had already been over for most of that 2 years. What changed was not her assessment. What changed was that she stopped maintaining the appearance of a relationship that internally she had already concluded. This is the core mechanism. The INFJ does not decide to leave and then leave. The INFJ leaves slowly and invisibly, over an extended period, and then at some point stops pretending they haven't. The pretending is the part that ends suddenly. The leaving itself was never sudden at all. 2. Why the INFJ does not raise the issues along the way. The most common question people ask when they encounter this pattern, usually after it has happened to them, is some version of, why didn't they just tell me? If something was wrong for 2 years, why was I never given the chance to know about it, to change, to address it? This question deserves a real answer, because the answer is not that the INFJ enjoys secrecy or considers confrontation beneath them. The answer is more specific than that, and it has to do with what the INFJ believes a relationship actually requires in order to be real. For the INFJ, a relationship is not primarily a set of behaviors that can be corrected through feedback. It is closer to a reflection of who two people actually are with each other. When the INFJ notices something, a pattern of dismissiveness, a recurring instance of someone prioritizing their own comfort at the INFJ's expense, a gap between what someone says matters to them and how they actually behave. The INFJ is not just registering an individual behavior that could be addressed with a conversation. They are registering data about character, about what this person is actually like, underneath the version of themselves they present. And here is the part that explains the silence. The INFJ does not believe that pointing out individual behaviors changes character. They have, in most cases, tried this before, with other people, sometimes with this person, and observed that the feedback produces a temporary correction followed by a return to the underlying pattern. The behavior was never really the problem. The behavior was a symptom of something the INFJ has already, through repeated observation, concluded is more durable than a single conversation can address. So raising the issue feels, to the INFJ, like a request they already know the answer to, not because they are pessimistic about people in general, but because they have, over the specific course of this specific relationship, gathered enough specific data about this specific person to know what a confrontation would produce. And what it would produce is not change. It would produce an uncomfortable conversation, a temporary adjustment, and the same underlying pattern continuing in a slightly more careful form. The INFJ has run this experiment before. They are not interested in running it again. 3. The 3 categories of evidence the INFJ is actually tracking. I think it is useful to be specific about what, exactly, the INFJ is tracking during this long invisible period, because it is not random and it is not everything. There are specific categories of information that matter disproportionately, and understanding them tells you a lot about what actually triggers a door slam versus what an INFJ will tolerate indefinitely. The first category is consistency between stated values and actual behavior under pressure. Anyone can articulate good values when nothing is at stake. The INFJ is watching for what happens when something is at stake. When there's a cost to acting in alignment with the stated value. Someone who says honesty matters to them, and then, under social pressure, tells a convenient lie. Someone who says they value the INFJ's time and then consistently treats that time as available on demand. The gap between the stated value and the behavior under pressure is, for the INFJ, the most reliable signal there is. It is far more informative than anything said during a calm conversation. The second category is how someone treats people who cannot retaliate. This sounds harsh, but it is one of the most consistent things INFJs report tracking, often without fully realizing they are doing it. How does this person speak about others when those others are not present? How do they treat service workers, junior colleagues, people with less power in a given dynamic? The INFJ's read on this is not really about those other people. It is about what it reveals regarding how this person would treat the INFJ if the INFJ ever became, in some sense, less powerful in the relationship, less needed, less interesting, less useful. The third category is what happens after an apology, not whether someone apologizes. Most people can produce an apology when the social cost of not doing so is high enough. What the INFJ tracks is whether the apology is followed by genuinely different behavior, or whether the apology functions as a kind of social reset that allows the same pattern to continue with a clean slate. An apology that is not followed by change is, to the INFJ, information. Not about whether the person is sorry, about whether being sorry for this person leads anywhere. 4. The specific moment the internal door actually closes. If the slam is the visible end of a long invisible process, there is still a moment, a real identifiable moment, where the internal door actually closes, where the relationship moves from being something the INFJ is still, on some level, hoping might be different, to something the INFJ has fully and finally concluded about. I want to describe what that moment tends to look like, because it is more specific and less dramatic than people expect. It is never the worst thing that happened in the relationship. This is the part that confuses people most, including sometimes the other person involved, who often assumes that if there was a final straw, it must have been something significant, a betrayal, a major conflict, something clearly bad enough to justify an ending. Usually it is not. Usually the final moment is something small, almost embarrassingly small if you tried to explain it to someone else. A man described this to me in terms I found genuinely moving. He said, the moment that ended a 15-year friendship was his friend making a joke, not a cruel joke. A small, throwaway joke, at a moment when this man had just shared something that mattered to him. And the joke was the friend's way of moving past the moment of vulnerability, rather than sitting in it. He said, it was such a small thing, I have forgiven him for much bigger things. But in that exact moment, something in me understood, completely and finally, that this person was never going to be able to meet me in the places that mattered most. Not because he didn't care, because he genuinely could not. And I had been waiting 15 years for evidence that he could. And the joke was the evidence that he couldn't. Not new evidence, confirming evidence. The thing that had been an open question for 15 years was, in that small moment, no longer open. This is what the final moment usually is, not a betrayal. A small, ordinary instance of exactly the thing the INFJ had been hoping was not actually true, delivered with enough clarity that hoping otherwise stopped being available. 5. Why there is no negotiation phase. One of the things people find most disorienting about the INFJ door slam is the absence of a negotiation phase. In most relationship endings, there is some period, sometimes brief, sometimes extended, where both people are aware something is wrong and there is at least an attempt, even an unsuccessful one, to address it before the ending becomes final. With the INFJ door slam, this phase often does not exist. One day, the relationship appears to be functioning, then it is over. There is no visible in-between. The reason for this connects directly to everything described so far. The negotiation phase, in most relationships, happens because both people are still uncertain about the outcome. There is genuine ambiguity about whether the relationship can be repaired, and the negotiation is an attempt to resolve that ambiguity. But for the INFJ, by the time the internal closes, the ambiguity is already resolved. The 2 years of observation, the categories of evidence, the small final moment, all of it has already produced a conclusion. There is nothing left to negotiate, because the negotiation would be asking the INFJ to reconsider something they have already considered, exhaustively, for a long time. This is why attempts to reopen the conversation after a door slam so often fail, even when those attempts are sincere. The other person is operating as though the relationship is in a state of live uncertainty, as though there's something to figure out together. The INFJ is operating from a place where the figuring out already happened. They are not refusing to negotiate out of stubbornness. They are declining to reopen a question that, for them, is not actually a question anymore. I think this is one of the hardest things for people to accept about this pattern, because it can feel deeply unfair. You're asking for a chance to talk about something, and the person on the other side has already, privately, finished the conversation without you. But understanding this is not really about making it feel fair. It is about understanding what is actually being asked when someone says, "I just want to talk about this," and why, for the INFJ, that request often arrives after the point where talking could have changed anything. 6. What the INFJ feels during and after, and why never look back is not quite true. The phrase "never look back" is part of how this pattern gets talked about. I want to push back on it gently, because I think it obscures something important about what the INFJ actually experiences. The door slam from the outside can look like indifference. The person is simply gone, unreachable, apparently unaffected. And because the INFJ does not typically display visible distress about the ending, does not cry, does not argue, does not seem to be struggling, the assumption is often that they were not that invested to begin with, that the ease of the exit reflects the shallowness of the attachment. This is almost always backward. The relationships that end with the most complete and permanent door slams are very often the relationships the INFJ was most deeply invested in. The completeness of the withdrawal is not proportional to how little the relationship mattered. It is proportional to how much processing the INFJ had to do, privately, before reaching the conclusion, and how much protection the INFJ now needs from a connection that cost them more than almost anyone around them ever knew. What actually happens after a door slam, for most INFJs, is a private and often extended grief process that the other person never sees, because by the time the door has closed, the INFJ has already decided that this particular grief is not something they are willing to make visible to the person who caused it. There is a specific kind of dignity in this that gets misread as coldness. The INFJ is not unaffected. They are simply unwilling to grieve in front of someone whose presence in the grieving would, in their assessment, only complicate it further. As for never look back, most INFJs do look back, privately, sometimes for years. The door slam ends the relationship. It does not end the INFJ's relationship with the memory of it, with the questions about what could have been different, with the specific quality of missing someone you were also, simultaneously, protecting yourself from. The slam is final. The feeling about it is not always as final as the slam makes it look. 7. When the door slam is right and when it might not be. I want to end with something that complicates the picture deliberately, because I think the INFJ community sometimes talks about the door slam in a way that is too uniformly validating, as though every instance of it is simply the INFJ's accurate perception finally being acted on, and the person on the receiving end simply failed to meet a standard that was always fair. Sometimes that is exactly what happened. The evidence was real, the pattern was real, the conclusion was accurate, and the relationship genuinely needed to end. I am not questioning that this happens, frequently and validly, but I think it is also honest to say that the same mechanism that produces accurate door slams can, in certain conditions, produce inaccurate ones. The pattern recognition that the INFJ relies on is built from accumulated experience, including experience with other people, in other relationships, sometimes going back to childhood. When a current person triggers a pattern match with someone from the INFJ's past, even based on relatively superficial similarities, the conclusion the INFJ reaches can be more about the earlier person than the current one. The door slam, in these cases, is not wrong about the pattern. It may simply be applying the pattern to someone it does not actually fit. There is also the question of timing relative to the INFJ's own depletion. A door slam that happens when the INFJ has been running on empty for a long time, when their capacity for nuance and patience is already exhausted, may reflect the depletion as much as it reflects the relationship. The same evidence, encountered when the INFJ had more capacity, might have produced a conversation instead of a conclusion. I raise this not to undermine the validity of the pattern in general, but because I think the INFJ who can hold both things. My perception is usually reliable, and also, my perception is not infallible, especially when I am exhausted or when someone reminds me of an old wound, is in a stronger position than the INFJ who treats every door slam as automatically justified, simply because it came from them. Trusting yourself and examining yourself are not opposites. The INFJs I know who navigate this best do both, continuously. 7 angles on something that gets reduced too often to a single dramatic image, the sudden disappearance, the door that's shut with no warning. The reality is slower, more considered, and more painful than that image suggests. Not a snap decision. The visible ending of a long invisible process, not coldness. Often the opposite, a depth of investment that made the eventual conclusion cost more than anyone watching from outside ever knew. If you have done this to someone, or had it done to you, I hope this gave you something neither side of that experience usually gets, an honest look at what was actually happening underneath. Brainy Quiet Mind. Subscribe. Share this with someone who has been on either side of a door that closed without warning. One question for the comments. Looking back at a door slam in your own life, yours or someone else's, can you identify the small moment that was actually the real ending, long before the visible one?